I'd like to thank you for inviting me to talk and to give me this opportunity to share some ideas with this audience. These ideas that I will be presenting today are basically the cornerstone of the book that I'm writing now about art and truth. And my paper tries to demonstrate that there is a lack of correspondence between our methods, in other words, our working concept of our history, and the world as it presents to us at this moment. In other words, between our methods and our historicity. This lack of correspondence is precisely what is asking for an exploded concept of our history. And Habermas, which is, I think, a philosopher that I believe to be one of the greatest thinkers of today, and he affirms that this lack of correspondence, it's exactly what leads to the lack of legitimacy. And in fact, I think that's why we are gathered here. It's becoming more and more difficult to legitimize our history. And I just want to make a parenthesis that this difficulty is felt much more in America, in North America, and in Europe than I think it's felt, for instance, in a country like Brazil, where I come from. And this is because we have always practiced a different methodology, if you want that term, but we always practiced a different kind of writing of our history, probably because of our past. But I remember quite well when I arrived in Brazil after my undergrad studies in Canada that I had to relearn everything because they approached the object in such a different way, you know. So we don't have that much of a problem with our history as I think the northern countries have. I believe the core of this problem lies, in fact, in our traditional forms of knowledge, meaning epistemology and hermeneutics, simply because they do not correspond to our current ontological modality, which I believe is marked by contamination. And I've been using this term a lot. I'm trying to polish this term in a certain way. I believe it's still a fragile term for me, because all my ideas are in process. They are being constructed. And so why? Mainly because both hermeneutics and epistemology are founded on the idea of purity. Purity is the underpinnings of our concept of identity and the cogito. By contamination, I mean both the environmental consequences of our exploitive means and the exchange and interchange of peoples, cultures, and ideas. I believe contamination defines our ontological modality because it's how we relate both to culture and to nature nowadays. Contamination could be said, and I'm working on that, to be our historical truth. And when I affirm that, I know it's a very dangerous thing to say because it's very easy for us to transform this concept of contamination into another identity. So I think we have to be very careful with that, and I'm trying to be very careful with this concept. So, because I see contamination in such a distinguishing position, that is an ontological position, I think we must contrive forms of knowledge or language games that are akin to our own ontology. If we are to avoid the short circuit that we are watching, for instance, in the field of our history, this non-correspondence. Non-Western forms of knowledge could help us exit the communicational cul-de-sac produced by the imposition of a rationalist form of knowledge. And when I mean non-Western, I really mean non-Western. I mean like the indigenous cultures. I'm always interested in understanding how they think, you know, not what they think, but really how they think. And we know that the only way of knowing that is knowing their language, and their language is disappearing. So it's something that's very urgent because we don't have other sources to bring us this feedback, or how could it be thinking out of this Western model, you know, and Western language, imposed by the Western language. Continental philosophy has flirted with non-Western philosophies and modalities of thought for quite a while, from Bergson to Husserl, from Foucault to Rorty. We are aware of all the speculations about Heidegger being seriously influenced by non-Western thought, though he himself denied all his life. But I don't know how much we can trust Heidegger. Schopenhauer is probably the most notorious case of this influence. And it seems that the problem is still how we see the other and eventually ourselves. We tend to see their philosophy as the infancy of our grown-up ideas. And the same has always happened to the arts, always considered somehow a play, and lately, even worse, an entertainment, mainly because it escapes the axiomatic world of the natural sciences. I totally agree with Adorno when he says that to mete out art to entertainment is a way of undermining its potential for social change. In a way, it's revolutionary power. So I agree entirely with what the previous speaker said about the politics and how art should deal with politics. So my paper, the whole paper, is an open defense on the art's capacity to outmaneuver our linguistic cul-de-sac. My defense of the arts is based on the ontology of art itself, on its not-I perspective. I see the art as art is the other by incorporation, and the other is historicity, a kind of social truth. Art not only unveils historical truth, as Heidegger affirmed, it incorporates it. And this is precisely why art is able to be in someone else's skin, a perspective that is totally opposed to our rationalist models of conceiving a relationship with the other, always based on identifying to dominate and to consume. Our forms of knowledge befit several ideological purposes in their impulse to dominate their objects. So my contribution to thinking an alternative way to look at our history is to look at art itself, to its very ontology. Art should be the model for our history, I believe. And when I said that, when I returned to Brazil, that's very much what they were doing. You know, they were looking at art. Everything came from the experience of art. And now that I see this from a certain perspective, even I think art in Brazil in the 60s kind of reflected that. You know, someone like Elio Tessica, we were talking in the morning, already conceived this idea of an experience of art, very much in the lines of John Dewey. And actually, John Dewey was pretty important in Brazil in that time, you know. I mean, the 60s and 70s. So I think art should be the model for our history. Art gives the clue to writing about art. That's basically what I believe. because it's an ontology based on the impure, on the circumstantial world of the senses, an ontology that rejects domination of all kinds, that does not allow that we consume the art object as we would like. And again, I think this is very interesting because everybody who is familiar with art, you go to a certain museum and you see that work and it's so fabulous. And then in the next year you would run there to see it again and it's just not there anymore, you know? Like all that presence that you saw in the first encounter is not there anymore. So nothing prepares you, right? But the experience itself is different from everything else that we know. And finally, the model of art forces us to bring back truth into our discussions, not to be afraid of the skepticism that looms over it, rejecting thus the kind of conformism that is implicit in the generally accepted idea of weak thinking. I tend to believe that we need a lot of hard thinking right now in order to find ways of communicating appropriately with the other. If we are to design unthought of, peaceful forms of sociability that will not regard rational thinking as hard necessarily, nor anything different from it, like art, for instance, as weak. That's basically my introduction. And I would like to show you some pieces that are works of an artist that I'm working now in Brazil. He's very young, and I'm actually targeting this very young generation because I want to explore this idea of experience with the work. I want my opinions to come only from this experience and from no other a priori values that could have, or things that could have validated that work, you know. And this is the work of Rafael Alonso. He's becoming very prominent very fast. Like it's actually difficult to find young artists now because as soon as you go there, they come and they become famous, you know. And he's becoming famous very fast. And I saw these paintings in the house of a friend, and I was shocked by it, you know, because I immediately recognized where they came from. Some of them are painted, and some of them are tapes. You know those brown tapes, very ugly ones, that we close boxes and stuff? That's where they came from. But actually, they came from that kind of image that in countries like Brazil, and I believe in others, are extremely common. They're very clumsy with images. And what impressed me in the works when I saw them was exactly how he could take from such a pedestrian, such a contaminated environment, you know, these ugly images, these ugly things, and transform them. And how art can do that. Only art can do, as far as I know, can do this transformation into something so special, you know. And as I looked more at these pieces, I realized that they had a lot of flaws in the making. If you look at the piece in the top, you can see some kind of mistakes, you know, like some problems that arise in the paint or in the tape. And I was thinking a lot about how all these discussions were dealing with our concept of modernity and modernity in countries like Brazil, in Latin America in general. And these flaws, they popped up like something that denied that kind of ideal modernity that Europe and, you know, had imagined. And but when you do that, you explode the whole concept of modernity, because modernity is supposed to be universal, right? So you cannot have a wrong modernity, a half modernity. You know, you cannot have modernity here and you don't have modernity there. You know, modernity presupposes a universal thing. So it's a flaw in the concept of modernity itself. You see that these, why? Because the flaws were not made by the artist. They were made by the industrial production of these tapes, or the colors of the paint. So what the artist does is to leave it or to remove them. That's the amount of subjectivity that he can put in his work, you know. But in the first place, these works seemed very interesting to me, especially because of that. And these rounded corners that immediately, for me, like as soon as I saw them, I realized that they came from the boxes, you know, which is, if they were in another environment, cultural environment, people would not probably recognize. These are the most recent works. I saw them like a couple of weeks ago, maybe. Same artist, and these stripes are really annoying. Again, when I saw them the first time, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't look at the paintings, you know, because the visual disturbance that they cause. And they are quite big, like the one on top is quite big, about 2 meters maybe. So again, this stress that the paintings cause, and also their sources, where these images came from. And like the others that came from, as I said, a very pedestrian culture, cheap jacks, boxes used by cheap jacks. Here, they came from a fashion that was in the summer fashion. And then I remembered when talking to him, I realized that I saw those people dressing, parading with these colors, gaudy colors, in the middle of summer, you know, in T-shirts and stuff. So again, it's like how the arts can transform this very ugly and pedestrian and prosaic, but it can only do that by going so deep into that prosaicism that it transforms it. Not always for beauty, because this is not the case. These works are not beautiful. But this possibility that the art offers to us of transforming, I think we should hold this, because this is the only way, I think this is the only way we have out of this communicational difficulties that we are having now. Aruna, that's it. Thank you.